Hello friends, I have had my Nikon Z7 for almost a month now, and I've been working towards my review of it. So I've done some little projects along the way, and I have shared them with you through videos along the way. If you haven't seen those, I have a playlist and I'll put a link to that up above. But in this video, I want to share some photos and video with you that I've taken with the Z7 that I shot over the weekend. I went on a couple of different outings where I was really focused on testing out the autofocus on the Z7. So I kind of compared it a little bit to my D500 and to my D810. I'm not talking any kind of direct scientific comparisons here, just being in the same situation and using both cameras with very similar lenses. I have my little notebook here because I kind of took some notes on my different thoughts, and I thought I would go through some of my notes with you and share some of the photos. So the first outing I went on was to a riparian preserve, and I went at sunrise. In fact, I got there before it was light outside at all. I needed to use my headlamp to get along the trails. And I used the Z7 and the 24-70 f4 lens, and also my D500 with the 17-55 f2.8 lens. Different maximum apertures, but similar focal ranges, so that's why I went with those. Now I wanted to use the D500 because that is the camera that I have that focuses the best. So I also brought the FTZ adapter and the 200-500 f5.6 lens. That's an f-mount lens, so I had to use the adapter when it was on the Z7 but not when it was on the D500. So the first thing I did was I took some photos across the pond that I was sitting at. I was using the longest focal length on the Z7 and my widest aperture f4, and I was in single servo, single point autofocus. Now across the pond was just kind of greenery. It was kind of a wall of greenery, so there wasn't a lot of contrast. It was quite dark outside, but I don't know, I was just testing it out. So I took a couple photos that way to see what the autofocus would be like. It was able to get focus. It did take a moment for it to focus. It didn't hunt, but it did take a moment for it to focus. And then I picked up the D500 and the 17-55, and the focus was so fast. And then I took a couple of more photos and realized that because the 17-55 has a maximum aperture of f2.8 and the 24-70 millimeter on the Z7 had a maximum aperture of f4, it really wasn't a fair fight because a lens or the camera uses the maximum aperture down to a certain point when it's autofocusing. So it was using more light to autofocus on the D500. So I put the FTZ adapter and the 17-55 f2.8 lens on the Z7, and voila, it was amazing. The D500 definitely had the edge over the Z7 in terms of autofocus, and that's what continued throughout that morning of taking photos of birds and such, and just kind of testing out, taking photos of leaves and whatever were around me. So let me see, I think that's pretty much it. Oh, I did note down here that the two more things. The 17-55 f2.8 lens is a DX lens, meaning that it is optimized for cropped sensor bodies like the D500. I love that lens, by the way. When I put it on the Z7, it automatically switched over to cropped sensor mode. So I was able to see everything in the viewfinder. The viewfinder didn't mask off anywhere. It was just full, the full viewfinder was filled with the image from my cropped sensor lens. So that was good news. It was something I was a little bit curious about because in the menus, I hadn't seen anywhere where it said that you could switch on or off the auto switching to DX mode. In my past full frame Nikon bodies, there's something in the menu that says you can switch to You can have the camera automatically switch to DX mode when you put a DX lens on the body, or you can have it not automatically switch. I hadn't seen that menu option, so I was curious what this Z7 would do. It just automatically switches, which is exactly what I would want it to do. So I'm glad that it does that. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was action. Using continuous autofocus, shooting these birds in flight using primarily the 200 to 500 f5.6 lens. What I have heard are some criticisms about the autofocus not being entirely accurate, like it missing sometimes, it not being fast enough, and I just didn't come across that. So I don't know if it's technique. I was using continuous servo dynamic area autofocus. I don't know if it's my technique or if it's my settings or, how I have autofocus set up compared to how the people who are criticizing autofocus are having their cameras set up or how they like to shoot. I don't know. That's why I was shooting. I was shooting handheld. I used a plenty fast shutter speed and I didn't have any issues at all. There were no photos where, as I was kind of going back through them on the computer, there were no photos that autofocus missed. There were photos that were out of focus because I missed, but nothing where, and I knew where I had missed because I remember, the bird flew too fast for me and I just couldn't keep up. So anyway, that's beside the point. So that was good news to me that the autofocus was good. So not as snappy as the D500, plenty snappy for most situations for me. Okay. My next outing was really cool. It was to go see it's called Electric Desert. It was at the Botanical Garden, the Desert Botanical Garden, and it is a light and sound art exhibit set at the Desert Botanical Garden. So kind of difficult to explain, but there's lots of lights and noise, and you're just walking around basically in the dark at night, and there's all these lights and music. Perfect place for me to try out using the autofocus and low light, right? I again brought the Z7. This time though, I used the 35mm f1.8 lens. And I brought with me, along with the Z7, my D810 and my older 35mm f2D lens. So kind of a close comparison in terms of lenses and maximum aperture. And with that, I pretty much found the same thing that I had seen at the Riparian Preserve the day before, where the camera did great. I was a little bit surprised actually at how well it did in the really, really dark situations. On top of that, the D810 it hunted a lot in the darker situations where the Z7 didn't. Now, there is a slight difference in the maximum aperture of the lens, so maybe that could account for some of that, but I was actually surprised at the Z7 being better in those low light situations than the D810 was. I've never had any complaints about the D810. Let me get that out of the way right now. I've never had any complaints about the autofocus on it, but yeah, it did really well. So that is pretty much it, I think. I don't think I took any other notes. Yeah, that was it. So really low light situations, some kind of faster action situations with the birds, and the Z7 did great. So again, I know that there are some critics out there saying that this, that, or the other thing about autofocus. If you're watching this because you've watched other Z7 videos, you know all the criticisms by now, but I just haven't found them. So I found the Z7 to be good autofocus, not as snappy as like my fast action D500, but snappy enough. So anyway, guys, that's it. Here are a few more photos and video from my times out with this camera, and I'll be sharing the review really soon. I'm working on it right now, and I'll be back soon. Thanks for watching.